My points of stress never came from like press conferences. Like I didn't care. Like if someone asked me something, I'm like, okay, they're annoying, but like whatever. It's just part of the job. I was really good at, even if it wasn't perfect, I would show up the next day and put in, I'd be at the track at 6:30 a.m. That part of it was easy for me. It was the stressors of trying to problem solve for these people, knowing that they had more options that kept me up at night. Like I just couldn't, trying to convince yourself, like I had this unrealistic expectation that I should be beating these people when I just simply wasn't as good as these people. So it's like that dynamic. And so the only time I would get like really frustrated is imagine, and this is like for listeners, this is interesting because imagine that you have a global conference in whatever you do, right? So you're anywhere around the world, the best of the best of the best of what you do are in one place, right? And you're good at something, but all of a sudden you see people come and you're like, oh my gosh, I've never seen, this person, do this thing that well. And it's just amazing. And then imagine you winning that competition for 2 weeks and then losing to one person and people going, well, fuck, that's a failure. That's a weird place to be. And that's kind of where Zverev is now. Like we were talking about before on air, and I hate the position for him because he's professional. He's always fit. He does all the things that you would want or expect a top player to do. I think swing production isn't as easy for him as it is for some people. So that people don't understand, like that dictates the style of play. So you were saying, I wanted him to just go for it. I mean, he's hitting first serves big. He's hitting second serves big. How else can he go for it without compromising kind of the meat and potatoes of what makes him effective? If you put your coaching hat on for a second.
Yeah, no, it was when I'm watching it, like I'm like, come on, like step in, like don't wait for it now because you'll have to start over to build your point. Like it's just how I react. Like it just naturally felt like that those thoughts were coming up for me. And as you were talking, like I think that it's really interesting for me to hear your thought process about kind of how you went about things. And because for me, like I knew that I could beat all these players that I lost. Like I'd beaten them, 2 weeks before when it wasn't a Grand Slam. So it was more of a mental thing. And so I'm curious, like there's nothing that I love more about like getting to know players and like hearing their thoughts. Like that was something that for me was very important to learn to open up about like my fears on the court, like because it is kind of tennis. You're not supposed to look weak. You're supposed to, not show your negative emotions. You try to kind of cover up at least for me that was the case, like how we were brought up kind of in the federation, and you weren't allowed to don't show negative emotions and but they're in there, right? And so I'm curious, like a guy like Zverev right now, like you saw him, like there was that moment where I guess Sinner went over and kind of talked to him for a little bit, and like you could see how disappointed he was. It's a different, you see Sabalenka, she's laughing, she's kind of joking to her team. Then you see Zverev, like you see, like he's heartbroken, right? Like,
well, that's the difference
like,
between having won 4 and not having done it yet.
But where is it? I'm curious if you compare the two of us, like, is his case more like yours, where he's just tennis wise? I don't know enough about like his head to head.
Yeah, I mean, he's beaten all the players. It's just it's an extended format. It's and for the guys, it's very different. Like if you give me one of the great players and you give me a shorter sample size, that leads to more of a toss up for a result, right? Like you give me Rafa 2 out of 3 versus Rafa 3 out of 5, I can tell you which one I'm taking as an option very quickly. So I think it's a little bit different, but he's pretty honest, and that almost makes me feel worse because he's just like, yeah, he goes, I serve better, but then once we're out of there, like he did everything else better, and he does everything else better. Is essentially what he said. So I'm just curious what you can do differently. Like, cause everyone knows that he needs to be able to And the things that make him great against a guy 20 in the world, where he serves big, he's consistent, he doesn't punch himself out, and he's really good in extended rallies, and he has one side that he can create pace off of. If someone 20 in the world who doesn't have the firepower of Sinner gets inside the court, if they attack the backhand side, he all of a sudden backs them up to where they're hitting a ball off their shoe tops, right? He has that capability off the backhand side, but the best players who can switch directions with that type of pace can choose the side, right? And he can't really back them up. And so it's just, for me, it's just this fascinating trade-off to see, like, what can he do? Can he, serve and volley more? He does it 0, and he has a big serve. Is there, do you serve 70% of your second serves to the forehand side to create that space on the deuce side and go the other way? I think all of those things are adjustments. I just don't like the lazy analysis of, you have to hit your forehand bigger and you have to step inside the court on that side 6 feet, when I don't think that it's actually that possible based on the stroke production, right? Like that's like telling Lindsay Davenport to go big and heavy on her shots when her superpower is hitting the ball flat and through the court, right? Like I don't think we go ahead.
But when you get put on, like, under pressure and you feel like your opponent is literally on top of the baseline, pushing you side to side, okay, then you either say, well, I have no chance because it doesn't match up, or I'm going to try to do the same thing and step in a little bit closer so that I'm taking a little bit of time away from, like, yeah, I did you ever adjust your technique for an opponent?
Yeah, always. But my adjustments would be more along the lines of, like, I would like to see Zverev. His backhand is so world class and it's so technically sound. I'd like to see him crush and rush sometimes, right? Like get in, like hit and get in. I don't think he can make that decision in the flow of a point on the forehand side. I don't think that that's possible. I almost think he needs to choreograph some plays, right? Whether it's a serve and volley, second serve to the forehand side, right? Or whether, basically, I just think they need to be looking for something else. So it's not, once it becomes predictable what he's doing, the best players in the world adjust, and then they can find, they can kind of poke that thing that's already cut, right? For me, it's more along the lines of switching the dynamic to where if he does get stuck in that pattern that's not good for him, it's the third time that they've seen it and not the 15th time that they've seen it already, to where it's predictable. If you know what's coming at your level, Kim, it's curtains for someone. If they don't have things that are big enough to bother you with their stock offering, right? And your job is to be so good that you force them into riskier behaviors, right? He seems like he can't get to the point where he takes on the riskier behaviors. And I just don't think it can exist easier, quicker on the forehand side. I think there are other ways to do it. I don't think it's taking your worst offering and making it riskier. I think he can take risks in other spots and then pick and choose his moments on the forehand a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you're making my head spin. Would you be open to coach somebody like him and to try and help him? Would that be
No,
I don't know.
I discussed my previous coaching experience with my wife 15 minutes ago on this podcast. It didn't end well. And also it's the same as you. I've actually reached out to you as I've been talking to other players and said, would you have any interest in coaching? And you said I think we're in the same boat where time and geography matter more to us than anything else right now. So no. But I just watch and I'm a nerd and I'm like, how can it's just not as easy as do this. It's how do we, you have to base everything on what you can actually do with your game.
But do you think because I'm again, I don't follow it as nearly as much as you do, especially on the men's side. But do you think, because he still has his dad, right?
I'm just going to say that sounds a little sexist, Kim. I don't need to.
No, I don't know the team setups as much as so maybe it would be good to get a former player to be a little bit more involved, or I don't know.
I think he's tried that. With he had Ferrero before Alcaraz had Ferrero. And I want to say he's dabbled in that space before, and it seems like it always kind of ends with his brother and his father again.
But maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like men's tennis is, and I'm not saying it's becoming more like women's tennis, but it's the guys are hitting the ball so much harder. They're not standing, maybe Medvedev, yes, but like they're not standing that far behind the baseline anymore as they used to, like years ago when right? Or some do, but like when you get to these matches, like look at Novak, like the way that he builds his points, he hardly hits 2 or 3 shots in the same corner. He just like it's like the game is changing. I feel like for men, especially those guys like Alcaraz, Sinner. Whenever they had a short like ball, they're going for their winners. And whereas I remember, when we were younger, and it was kind of like, okay, I can step in, but I'm just going to kind of keep the rally going, wait for the right shot, and whereas I feel like now these guys like Sinner and Alcaraz,
I think the only way that you can
so aggressive.
The only way, well, I think you have to be an absolute monster physically to cruise back. Now, Zverev does it. He doesn't get inside the court very often. Medvedev does it, but he has this ball flight where he can go 12 feet behind the baseline and still have net clearance of 3 inches and do it consistently. So like if you're playing against him, you're hitting up to him all the time, which is, it doesn't translate on TV at all. It's actually not dissimilar to Leighton back in the day, right? He didn't play as far back as Medvedev, but every time he hit a backhand, it didn't look big on TV, but I'm having to attack it from below my waist against the fastest human alive. Like it was this constant thing of like, shit, can I go now?
But he was also comfortable there, right?
Totally.
Like it's your comfort, especially in those moments where like somebody like Maddie, whose comfort is, let me try to whip my forehand, is different than an Iga her comfort is not to be the most aggressive player. She's turned into that. Like she's becoming more aggressive and she's taking the ball earlier, but that's not her nature. Her comfort isn't there. And so to see like Maddie against Iga as well, like you can see that the when it gets really close like that, your nature, your instinct, like when mentally there's a lot of things to focus on and to worry about, you fall back into kind of old patterns and your safe space kind of.